sky.
A little improv.
When you rewind this, you will see Nicholas Blair. You were out of
Please
the room.
welcome Cathy Curtis. Cathy, this is your first time. You've been to functions where your dad and Dark Shadows have been honored, but this is your first time to be at a convention with fans and the whole reunion environment. And how are you feeling? There you go.
Wow. Well, I feel deeply moved, and I feel a mixture of like sadness and touched, and you know, where I live, nobody really mentions Dan Curtis, and there's something about it. It almost feels like bringing him back to life, and you know, I miss him so much, and so there's something just so heartwarming to have people talk about him and appreciate him and honor, you know, all that went on with that. So, so it's a real mix. You know, I haven't been around this father energy, you know, since he died. I don't know, 19 years ago.
Yeah.
But I appreciate it.
Well, you know, it's a privilege. And fortunately, while your dad, you know, was with us, he certainly, but from Dark Shadows to the Winds of War and War and Remembrance and the Night Stalker and Children of Terror and so many things that he hit a lot of little touchstones that I know, you know, you heard growing up. And of course, you grew up in New York and then moved west in the 70s as your dad migrated out to the TV movie and more adventures as a director. In film, but could you tell us about your earliest memories of your dad working in television as a kid?
Okay, well, you have to realize I was 8 years old when the first episode came on, so guess how old I am. So really my earliest memory was, and I didn't understand the details back then, but he had something, back then I knew he had something to do with the cartoon Linus the Lion-Hearted.
Yeah.
Right? He was a salesman, I find out later. But it was just thrilling, right? I was like the perfect age for almost everything that he did. So I was probably like 5 years old. And his voice, he even had his voice on it sometimes.
Yeah.
Something to dig up.
Yeah.
So that's my earliest memory.
And that was born out of his sales background, because he started in sales at NBC and films in the early 50s after marrying your mom, and it was just a whirlwind of as the industry grew, and your dad found his niche because selling was always part of his job as a producer, and Dad Curtis was a master salesman and storyteller and all of the above. But could you recall your first time you visited the set of Dark Shadows and as an 8, 9, 10-year-old, whatever, what that felt like?
Yeah, it was thrilling. You know, I could only go when it was school vacation, and I got to invite a few friends, and given that we all loved the show, you know, it was just thrilling. I mean, you know, I was always surprised how slow things moved, right, in television, but it was just, I mean, it was just so much fun.
The sets were like a playground for a kid, yeah, and
yeah, you know, and I remember it very vividly. You know, it's like you walk in and there were those stairs in the foyer, and so that was the thing that would be set up, and then the living room, and it was a real treat.
Now, the part of the Dark Shadows folklore is your dad talking about being at home, and you know, the show had been on less than a year. There were some challenges. He brought in Diana Malay's character about Laura the Phoenix, the whole fire, and they brought in a fourth camera, and the fire department did all this combustible work, and and the wages went up. And then your dad got the idea to do Vampire, and he said part of that was influence at the breakfast table, perhaps at home. Do you recall how that took place?
Yeah, well, I've heard stories about it, but I also feel like I remember like a certain piece of it. Me and my sister thought the show was moving kind of slow and kind of boring. And my father always imitated us when he told the story. He's like, and my kids said to me, "Daddy, make it scarier." And I think I remember saying that, and he said back to us, "You want scarier? I'll give you scarier."
So it was a challenge.
So that is actually my claim to fame, actually.
Well, did you feel different the way your friends reacted to your dad being this producer, and how much fame did you get up from that, Carl?
Well, when I lived in New York, I was a very shy kid. And people who I didn't know would always come up to me and say, "Did your dad?" And I was quite obnoxious because I knew what they were going to say, and I said, "Yes." I mean, on some level, I just think I felt very proud of him. And again, I was of the age group that the kids were really into it. So people really, and it was unusual in New York. If we lived in California, that would be different. But it was a novelty where I went to school.
I got you. Well, now so many of the younger viewers would say they ran home from school, and depending on what part of the country you're in, the show was on at 4 o'clock or 3 o'clock or what may have you. And did you have an occasion to make it, whether it was appointment television or occasional television, how often would you check in on the show that often as you know?
I was his biggest fan. I watched, unless I was away in the summer at camp, which was hard, I'm pretty sure I watched every episode.
Well, that's sweet. That's sweet. Yeah. The big thrill then, after the show was on the air for 4 years, your dad, he really hustled to sell Dark Shadows as a motion picture. And I know Catherine and some others told stories. He went to see the Avco films chief, and had I think some of the actors even went over to his office dressed in costume. Wasn't that right, Catherine? I mean, Dan was a showman, but New York was such an epicenter of that period. And did you go on the set when Dark Shadows went on location for Tarrytown and the House of Dark Shadows, 9 Dark Shadows movies?
I have a vivid memory of going to Tarrytown, that house. And I remember watching Roger Davis do a scene with a stunt person rolling down a hill, complaining about the pants, that he needed another pair of pants. And I think he said something about a shirt. No, I'm kidding. So I did go on the set there. And, and the thing about it is when it was a movie, it was so exciting to all of us and my father. And we used to go to Westwood. He's like, "Hey, you want to go see how long the line is?" And so we would go and we would watch the line, and then we would go in. And my father loved hearing like when people screamed, and there was a lot of joy in that part of our lives, my father's work. And when it was in the movie theater, it was a thrill.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you have any recollection of then when he did the second film, which commenced shooting right after the TV show ended, which wasn't known at the time when he and Sam Hall started the final script, and then when they learned Jonathan Frid did not want to participate, so there was a lot of hustling and bustling, and then this film was done, and it was it took a different direction than the first movie. And then the chief at MGM, James Aubrey, who Dan your dad had wrestled with when he was one of the head honchos at CBS a few years earlier, and forced your dad to cut, a huge chunk out of the movie. And do you recall any of that drama? That was probably not necessarily something your dad, did he come home, talking about that kind of thing?
I mean, I kind of remember it, but he did come home bitching about the network and how much he had to cut. I don't know how I'm going to cut it. They want me to cut it, and just the aggravation.
Yeah. Well, I tell you, he was so pleased. Darren Gross. Darren, are you here in the room or somewhere?
They left.
He was wearing a maroon shirt.
They left, yeah.
Anyway, but and Darren works over at MGM Amazon in their asset management and archives, and he was the fellow that dug out the YCM, the 3-strip color negative of your dad's director's cut, and that we've been working and just trying to get this thing fully restored, and we're very close after, because your dad wanted that done. And it's in Warner Brothers owns it now as part of the Ted Turner stuff. But so that's become part of the folklore is restoring Night of Dark Shadows. And so hopefully this time next year, we'll hopefully be running a victory lap.
That would be great.
Okay, yeah. Well, that's not it. I don't think so. I mean, that's a horrible development. Hopefully, they're staving it off a little bit.
Till 20.
Anyway, that ultimately should not be a determining factor. Yeah, thanks. But your dad's creative process. Having seen him, in the '90s forward, and I think he was always someone who just, as we could see from the film and some of these others. Tomorrow, those of you who weren't part of this little preview, you'll see some really exciting film that shows Dan Curtis back in the middle, literally, of the Dark Shadows era, and exactly, what Dan felt about how he presented this show to daytime audiences, and. But his whole creative process, because your dad infamously always wanted to make, obviously in daytime television, there was literally no violence. And as the show went on, I think the censors were asleep on a couple of episodes of Dark Shadows. And there's one where poor Conrad Bain, the last time you see him, he's being drugged across the floor. He's got his, the werewolf has done him in, And I think that was like Christmas episode in 1968 or something. And Nicholas Blair is throwing Maggie Evans on the altar, And so it's kind of like, but the show was never that. And that one day, I think a lot of parents saw it that Christmas holiday and said, "You're not watching this series." But your dad's creative process, he loved, he grew up with, he was a big reader. He enjoyed, he wasn't a sci-fi fan per se. He was really more the gothic and the suspense and the romance, which ultimately that's what Dark Shadows mostly was, because it's certainly the horror was so much of that was implied, and it was just it was really down to the characters in the story. But what was the most interesting period of the intense period that you ever witnessed your dad's creative process and what he might bring home from the office,
I think I just always saw him working on it and thinking about it. I mean, he read lots of books, he would read scripts, and he was like always trying to come up with ideas. And I think he used historical ideas, current day ideas, and he put a lot of energy into it. Forever, I remember reading a lot of Edgar Allan Poe, and I think I still have those books that he had. And so I don't know really what else to say about it, but he was always thinking about it, always talking about it, always running it by my mother. My mother was Norma, was a huge influence on him. You know, he trusted himself, yes, but in a weird way, he kind of trusted her more.
Absolutely.
Right?
I mean, it was that way later on. I mean, he always, I was hear him calling her mom, or just, she was around, and he just really had that reliance, and but then, and he also had, you know, some old friends that he would always rely on, and so your dad was good about getting feedback, and because he really did want to kind of have the, you know, the just the temperature of and he really enjoyed obviously the whole crazy world of Gothic romance, because he had always wanted to do all the Gothic tales as standalone features or television, which he did with Turn of the Screw, and which was the most elaborate. He went to England and shot the thing on tape with Lynn Redgrave, and then he did Frankenstein on the MGM lot, and Dorian Gray, and he had other things. Sam Hall worked, you know, your dad worked, Matthew, with Dan on a couple of those things after Dark Shadow. Yeah, and there was a Wuthering Heights treatment that never got done. But so your dad really became known as the king of television horror, you know, for lack of a, you know, I mean, it by doing all those ABC movies of the week, that really solidified. I mean, my God, The Night Stalker was the top TV movie of its time, and then the sequel, and ABC reran the heck out of those things, and then of course he ended up doing Trilogy of Terror, which, you know, is another indelible mark, and and your dad enjoyed rolling with that, and then Burnt Offerings, and Dracula with Jack Palance was theatrical. It was TV here, but it was a film he shot overseas, and you know, he did the Prohibition, Melvin Purvis. You know, he wanted to do more of those. He did 2 of those with his cast of great characters. He liked, your dad was loyal to a lot of the people, Johnny Carlin and Harris Yulin and Jeffrey Lewis, and just a lot of these character guys, and Jack Palance. But that was after you moved out west, and so here you were moving from the suburbs of New York, and in the 70s you guys relocated across the country. Can you talk about just the change of scene and how that impacted the family?
Well, I can say that for me, you know, I was 13 years old, and it was really thrilling. I mean, it wasn't the same for all of us, but you know, we were moving from New York, and there were like 5 huge moving vans that were going to take a month, and so I remember very vividly when we flew into California. We drove down Sunset Boulevard, noticing the palm trees and the excitement of it all and the good weather. And then my father had to stay at the Beverly Hills Hotel for a month. And it was just a lot of fun. And unfortunately, me and my sister sat outside all day the first day, and we were so burnt that we couldn't move. But you know, for me it was thrilling, and I think it was a great change for my mother. I mean, a big difference from East Coast, West Coast weather, and play golf all year, so that was good for her. But and then my father didn't have to travel as much, because when we were in New York, he was flying to California all the time.
And you mentioned golf because that was such a huge part of your dad's life, professionally and personally. He produced a couple of golf shows, one of which won an Emmy, and 10 years of CBS Golf Classic. And I know he told me once, he said that was a great little cash cow from him, you know, and as he became, you know, a real player, you know. And so you're out west, and it's a whole new scene, but he's working like crazy, and obviously having a great time. And then before you know it, he's got a deal over at Paramount, and he and Barry Diller go down and see Herman Wouk in Palm Springs, and somehow convince him that Winds of War is right for their taking on ABC, and because Herman Wouk had been burned by a couple of the earlier film adaptations of Caine Mutiny. And so forth. And so your dad became totally immersed in retailing World War II with a romantic storyline of the Henry family. And can you tell us, your dad was just on top of the world, because all of a sudden, and then the sequel even more so, which was twice as ambitious, twice as long, 1,000 times darker because it was the Holocaust, and it won him all the accolades that were rightfully deserved. And he was just, thanking ABC for ponying up the dough. That was his Emmy acceptance chief, He was chewing gum, I think he was just up there, with his swagger. And, can you talk about your dad just really, the 80s having really become this golden period for him to really reach his full potential. And as a self-taught creative who went from sales to producing to directing and writing and just pulling it all together.
Yeah. It was an incredible experience. I remember talking to him when he got to travel the world and film things on location exactly where they happened and really use his skills like he wanted to. And the thing that I keep thinking about as I'm saying this is at his funeral, you were there, Herman Wouk came from Palm Springs to LA, and he was, I think, 92 years old, and he shuffled down the aisle, and he went up and he talked, and he said, makes me sad. He said, Dan Curtis gave me the greatest gift that I ever had. And he said nobody could have done what he did. Nobody would have fought with the networks to make it as accurate and as real. And I think that for my father, it was just very, very satisfying. And he felt like it was his best work, and he put 10 years of his life into it. And I'm glad that he got appreciated for it. And it was incredible. And I watched a lot of it with him, and I learned a lot. He pointed out the directing, what made it an interesting shot, what makes directing boring. And, but it was definitely the highlight of his career, by far, I would say.
And, after that, which is an impossible task, how do you follow up, World War II and the depths and extent, because Warren Remembrance is still and will remain the biggest miniseries ever made for commercial television. And Brandon Stoddard, ABC, really saved the day with all the budget, and that thing was well north of $100 million, which, it's not chump change now, but back then that was like mega. And so Dan's back to Dark Shadows after that, just because Brandon Tartikoff, NBC, wanted stuff. There was a writer's strike, and so that's when. So Matt Hall came out with his dad Sam, and a few new writers, and it was Dark Shadows for prime time. And then your dad did another, decade and a half of producing and directing. He did his really only true sci-fi project, the Intruders, They Are Among Us, right? That was a 4-part that I think Jeff Zagansky talked him into at CBS. And but it has some great people in it, And Dan Castaneda in there, he was on Dark Shadows, And but with the whole industry changing, and he was able to do a Hallmark Hall of Fame, which was right up his alley, The Love Letter, which was about, it's a somewhere in time type of story, Jack Finney. And so, your dad was such a romantic. And so despite, a lot of the gruff characters and the scary situations, he seemed to come back to love stories, and no matter what they were, wrapped in. And do you know where that and your dad's fierce devotion to your mom, was just one of the most devoted things I've ever seen, and I think everyone would agree. So where do you think that romantic, that strength of your dad that he just felt?
It's hard to know for sure, but I was thinking about it, and given how my father grew up with a lot of loss and I think disconnection, I just think his experience with my mother and having that type of love and attunement was so powerful that he always, like put it in with a vampire. So I don't know for sure, but I think there was some kind of drive, and in some ways it kind of saved his spirit, meeting my mother, I would say. And it's like a real corrective experience he had in that relationship. So, and it's hard. I don't really like to think of my father as a romantic. But he loved romance, and he definitely loved his horror days. I mean, he used to talk to me about it, how everything was timing, and there was something so satisfying to him about doing horror. And again, he would love to watch the stuff with us and see where we screamed and when we went to the theaters. But that was an incredible challenge, and then it meant a lot to him to be able to shift into doing things that really mattered to him. Like his last two movies was Our Fathers and Saving Millie. He filmed that within the last year of his life. And Our Fathers was about the whole thing in Boston of the priests abusing kids, and he connected with the people that were abused, and so I felt like it felt good to him to do things that were powerful and real and applied to everyday life. And I don't know if people saw Saving Millie, but it really paralleled what he was going on. It was about a couple that were very, alive, and then the woman gets Parkinson's, and it kind of shows it all the way through. And it's incredibly moving down to that last scene. I'll never forget it. And I used to talk to him on the phone when he was filming it, and he was dealing with my mother with kind of middle stages of Alzheimer's. And so I think he felt really good about putting it on the screen, and at the same time, it was really hard how much it paralleled his life.
I think he sent flowers to your mother every day when he was up in Canada filming that. Yeah. And because the separation was so tough, I mean, your dad was a force of nature, and I think it's a testament. All the Dark Shadows people come back year after year because he did pull together this company, and it was work, but it was special, and you never know it at the time. I think, who knows? It's like people, old singers, they think, I didn't know I'd be singing these songs, hit songs for 50 years, and they can be playing these shows for 50 years, and it's 60 years. More or less a daytime show, most of that stuff got wiped over, but and your dad also being a businessman, having, the smarts, it wasn't, ABC didn't own the show, but, so he really had a lot of control, and ABC was the avant-garde network at the time. They were still building up, and their daytime schedule had rock and roll with Where the Action Is. It had the Newlywed Game, Dane Wayne. It was really a youthful schedule, and the same thing at night. They had Batman and Addams Family and things like that, and so ABC was kind of the funky, fun network to be. And anyway, your dad had a long connection there. And I think, too, knowing all your dad's loyal connections in the business over the years, And so it was terrific that he was able to end his career with those two projects that were so, particularly Millie being this parallel, and, and obviously, and your dad wasn't sick at the time, and so that was, you're never used to seeing, the type of the bull of a man, you know, getting sick. But you know, the fact that he and your mom were together, and there was a little bit of poetry in there because you know their devotion really was so touching, you know, and obviously you and Tracy being equally so, and because you've not gone into business, Tracy went into the business for a while, so you know it's all kind of been a little bit of, I mean, you took on golf, you know, yeah, so, you know, and your mother did some interior decorating for a while, right?
She did what?
She did a little interior decorating, I think.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I know the office and things. And Tracy did a little bit of that at one point too, right? So, I mean, it all filters down. The creative juices, right? Yeah. How it inspires. But, we've got time just for a handful of questions if anybody wanted to throw anything out here. And I think Guy Haynes is first up.
I love your dad's two movies, The Long Days of Summer and Whenever Day Was the 4th of July. Did he have a sister by any chance? Are they kind of semi-autobiographical?
He did not have a sister.
In each of those movies, Daniel had a younger sister named Sarah, and I just was always wondered. But they're wonderful, endearing movies.
Yeah.
And I really, you would know better than me. I feel like he put his heart into that.
Well, and you must know that, you know, it was based on a group of friends, you know, they grew up with in Connecticut, you know, with this made-up story, but he had, you know, people from his life in it from when he was a kid.
Thank you.
I kind of got the impression once when I talked to him about it, because I got him and Dean Jones into the studio to do a commentary over the playback for the DVD, and you know, and of course your dad had a little sister Sarah in Dark Shadows, and so maybe I got kind of the impression from him he kind of had a wish that he had to have a little sister. You know? But the Whenever Day Was 4th of July and Long Days of Summer, thank you for mentioning, those really stand out as just a totally separate category for Dan Curtis, and it's kind of like Dan Curtis meets To Kill a Mockingbird. You know?
Right.
Yeah, and particularly the first one. They were both pilots for series, and the second one he did for ABC, and it was called The Coopers. And once again, they made him cut it down to the feature, but your dad had these ideas, and he was very lucky. He was persistent, and he would get things made, you know. I mean, like every producer, he had a drawer of unproduced stuff, but, you know, he was always, even during some of the downtimes, he was always working on the computer every day with Debbie Smith, who is Debbie still here? Debbie was one of Dan's assistants in the 90s, who really, and she wrote for Dr. Quinn and other shows after Dan, but
You energetic questions.
you got some questions over here? Okay, in the front row, Bob.
I think it's really great that you were a fan of Dark Shadows. Who was your favorite character, and what was your favorite storyline?
Well, well, obviously, or maybe not obviously, my favorite storyline was Barnabas. And I'd have to go with Maggie Evans, Josette, and Angelique. And I might even say they were my very first crushes.
I just want to say that, is it my turn? Okay, I'm sorry. I just wanted to say that it was a pleasure to hear you, because you must have been so proud every time you come to a convention or another one is there, that it's because, this makes me cry, I'm sorry, because of your father, because of what his vision and because of what he accomplished. All of these people whose lives he touched, what a neat thing to know about your dad, and that's all that I wanted to say. I just think you're pretty wonderful. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
How involved are you, or will you be in the
Well, Eric is really nice about it, and they seem like they're interested in our ideas, but, you know, I'm not really involved in the, other than discussing it and looking at the progress and giving my opinion and that, but I'm not in the industry.
Matt Hall.
I kind of wanted to just gently amend the story you told before of the cutting of Night of Dark Shadows, because my father and Dan were in the room with Jim and Audrey when that happened, and I know my father was devastated, and I think Dan was too. I think it was an extremely rough moment for both of them, and you know, I just kind of. I just wanted to say, like, that impacted our family, and I'm sure it impacted yours, you know, because that was just a nasty, nasty moment, and they did a ton of work to make it, to create the two of them together, Sam and Dan, just worked together, like, for a chunk of huge time, trying to make that movie work, and I think they gave it all they could, and it was a very difficult thing. And I know my father came back to New York and like wept on the airplane, you know. And I don't, I'm sure they were together. They really had a very strong partnership at that point. Yeah. And I'm sure that they both mutually felt that sense of almost traumatic, you know. Anyway, it hit us really hard. I'm sure it hit you guys really hard.
They were gutted. The film was gutted.
They were. Yeah. They had a very good working relationship.
Yep. Yes?
From what I've heard about James Audrey, there isn't a single villain or demon on Dark Shadows that was as horrible as he was. And I just want to ask you, you said that you talked to your dad about the stories and stuff. Did he continually get input from you and your sister as the show was progressing? And could you say things like, that dream curse, Dad, please?
You know, I think he was all set after that. I think he needed my input then.
Wanted to add something.
Yeah, there's just a couple things I want to say before we end. Anyway, my father was very loyal and very generous. And, you know, he could be rough on the outside, but if he felt your loyalty and loved you, and, you know, there isn't anything in the world that he wouldn't do for somebody. I mean, you know, after he died, I heard stories like he helped somebody's son, you know, go to rehab, or somebody from Windsor War wrote him wanting $10,000 and he sent it, and then he wrote back and said, well, we needed more money for the taxes for it. And then with the people that he worked with. And the other thing is, you know, he often wasn't sure who his friends were, because when you can give somebody a job, he used to talk to me about that. I mean, certainly, you know, some people. But then when he was in his last stages of life, you know, the people that showed up, it meant so much. And Jim and Catherine were there. And so it was really wonderful, like the whole Dark Shadows family and how people were there for each other. And I also really want to thank Jim Pierson, because, you know, my father told me this story long ago when it was happening. Jim said, Dan, why don't you put it on VHS? And he's like, why? Who's going to watch it? And just the way, Jim, you have continued to keep Dark Shadows going and all that you know, and I feel like you've helped our family a lot. And anyway, so I just want to thank you. You're incredible what you've done.
Well, look, that's very kind, and it's a joy to be here, and I'm so glad you got to come experience the aura and the supernatural glow of all the fans and extended Dark Shadows family, and you got to catch up with few friends you haven't seen in a while, and there's always more Dark Shadows. There's always more life ahead, right? And hopefully we'll all be celebrating other things before the next anniversary, Okay, but so I thank you so much for sharing your time.